Welcome to the first episode of the series Critical Thinking, a gateway to the modern world. Imagine a very familiar scenario. You spent 4 years in university memorizing thousands of pages of textbooks. You pass your exams with high, even excellent scores. But then, when you leave the lecture hall and face a complex real-world problem where there are no ready-made answers, no complete data, and conflicting viewpoints, you don't know what to believe or where to begin. If higher education only stops at one-way knowledge transmission, it has failed in its most fundamental mission. Educational researchers point out that critical thinking is the defining condition of higher education. A program that does not encourage critical thinking in the relationship between teachers and students cannot be considered true higher education. In other words, a university is not a repository of knowledge, but a place to cultivate critical thinking skills, not just the ability to question. Students become merely obedient memory, not independent intellectuals. So, what exactly is critical thinking in higher education? To answer this question, we will go through the most fundamental approaches. Part 1. Robert Ennis. Critical thinking as a decision-making ability. Before delving into a specific definition, let's pause for a moment with the question. From there, we can ask,
is critical thinking simply a habit of rejecting everything, or is it the ability to make well-founded decisions?
This is a very common misconception, and to clarify, we need the approaches of Robert Ennis, one of the scholars who laid the foundation for this field. Robert Ennis defines critical thinking as rational, reflective thinking, focused on deciding what to believe or what to do. Here, the focus isn't on opposition, but on decision-making. According to Ennis, critical thinkers need not only analytical skills, but also the right thinking tendencies, such as a willingness to seek reason, openness to new evidence, and a desire to do the right thing within reasonable limits. He illustrates this with the image of a jury in a criminal trial. Jurors don't need absolute certainty, but must make judgments beyond reasonable doubt. To do that, they must assess the reliability of sources, apply background knowledge, and, most importantly, have a tendency to seek reason rather than jump to conclusions. And now, let's return to the original question of thinking.
Is critical thinking simply a habit of rejecting everything, or is it the ability to make well-founded decisions?
The answer is, critical thinking isn't about emotional opposition, but rather the ability to make rational decisions supported by both aptitude and skill. But having such skills and a structured mindset is not enough, and that's where we need to move on to the second approach. Part 2. Benjamin Hamel. Critical thinking is the art of inquiry. Before we continue, let's consider a question.
Is someone with sharp logic, but who doesn't truly want to seek the truth, a critical thinker?
This question leads us to Benjamin Hamel's argument. Hamel argues that skill alone isn't enough. The core of critical thinking lies in a willingness to inquire. A person may be a very good arguer, but if they only use their arguments to defend personal biases or to manipulate others, they are not a critical thinker. According to Hamel, what distinguishes a true critical thinker from someone who is merely good at debating is intrinsic motivation. A critical thinker inquires, even when no one asks, without a score and without an audience.
So you now have the answer to the question. Is someone with sharp logic, but who doesn't truly want to seek the truth, a critical thinker?
The answer is no. Sharp logic without the will to seek the truth only turns argumentation into a tool of justification, not an instrument of enlightenment. However, even with the motivation to question, critical thinking in universities still needs a specific form of expression, and that form is academic argumentation. Part 3. Richard Andrews. Critique is argumentation. And before delving deeper, let's pause with the question,
Why is critical thinking so closely linked to academic argumentation in higher education?
This is a key point in Richard Andrews' approach. Andrews argues that clear thinking is critical thinking. In the university environment, critical thinking does not exist in an ambiguous or subjective form. It is most clearly manifested in argumentation. Through academic papers, dissertations, and research debates, knowledge at the undergraduate and postgraduate levels is not formed from certainties, but from points of contention, and it is argumentation that transforms thought into something testable, refutable, and challengeable.
So you now have the answer to the question.
Why is critical thinking so closely linked to academic argumentation in higher education?
The answer is that argumentation is the concrete manifestation of critical thinking. Without argumentation, critique is merely personal opinion, not academic knowledge. But even when critical thinking has been honed through argumentation, a bigger question remains. Should critical thinking remain confined to thoughts and writing, or should it go further? Part 4. From thinking to critical thinking. I have a question for everyone.
Is critical thinking merely an intellectual ability, or does it lead to a way of life and action in the real world?
This question is answered profoundly by Ronald Barnett. Barnett doesn't just talk about critical thinking, but about the critical level of critical thinking as a way of human existence. He divides critical thinking into 3 domains: knowledge, self-reflection, and action in the world. According to Barnett, critical thinking requires courage because critical action often clashes with power, norms, and the dominant order. A person who is only good at theoretical analysis but insensitive to the world can turn knowledge into a harmful tool of reason.
So you now have the answer to the question.
Is critical thinking merely an intellectual ability, or does it lead to a way of life and action in the real world?
The answer is that critical thinking is not just about thinking correctly, but about living responsibly with one's knowledge.
Now, let's review the reinforcement questions.
Is critical thinking simply a habit of rejecting everything, or is it the ability to make well-founded decisions?
The answer is, critical thinking isn't about emotional opposition, but rather the ability to make rational decisions supported by both aptitude and skill.
Is someone with sharp logic, but who doesn't truly want to seek the truth, a critical thinker?
The answer is no. Sharp logic without the will to seek the truth only turns argumentation into a tool of justification, not an instrument of enlightenment.
Why is critical thinking so closely linked to academic argumentation in higher education?
The answer is that argumentation is the concrete manifestation of critical thinking. Without argumentation, critique is merely personal opinion, not academic knowledge.
Is critical thinking merely an intellectual ability, or does it lead to a way of life and action in the real world? Is critical thinking merely an intellectual ability, or does it lead to a way of life and action in the real world?
In short, critical thinking in higher education is not merely a habit of emotional opposition, but rather a rational, reflective approach to making well-founded decisions, as Robert Ennis emphasizes. However, skills and the structure of thinking are insufficient because, as Benjamin Hamel points out, the core of critical thinking lies in the motivation to seek truth, even without scores or an audience. In the university environment, critical thinking only truly exists when it is concretized into academic argumentation, as Richard Andrews argues. Without argumentation, critical thinking is merely a personal opinion, not verifiable knowledge. Finally, according to Ronald Barnett, critical thinking doesn't stop at thoughts or writings. It must become a way of being for individuals, where knowledge, self-reflection, and action are interconnected in a sense of responsibility to the world. Thus, critical thinking in higher education is not simply about finding fault or objecting. It is reflective thinking for decision-making, the drive to relentlessly question, the ability to construct arguments, and the integration of thought, self, and action. The ultimate goal of higher education is not to create people who know a lot, but to cultivate critical thinkers, individuals capable of understanding, choosing, and acting responsibly in an uncertain world. However, understanding what critical thinking is only the first step. In the next episode, Teaching Critical Thinking Skills, we will move beyond theory to concrete practice, how to teach, learn, and cultivate Robert Ennis's critical thinking skills in the classroom, at work, and in daily life. See you in the next episode.